Hello and welcome to today's episode. This one's for all the beginners out there, the guys and girls that want to get out on track but haven't quite got that far yet. They've got a car set aside but they're not sure what they need to do to it. We're going to run through for you all what mods you might want to do, what things you might want to try to make the car drive a bit better, and also what you need to do to actually pass scrutineering and get out there in the first place. So before we get too deep into this video, let's work with some basic assumptions. The first being you have a car, it's manual, it's rear-wheel drive, and it's pretty much stock. The next one is going to be that you're going to a beginner type event, something that's got like a C class where people are expected to spin out regularly, or even better, a drift school where there's instructors to teach you what to do, tell you what you're doing wrong, and work with you in the car. So you've got your car and you've got your date to be out on track, so you're halfway there. What we're going to talk about now is scrutineering. I know a lot of people probably breeze over this, they're more interested in mods and that sort of stuff that you can do to your car, but that's not going to get you out on track. The scrutineering is actually pretty relaxed, if I'm honest, at least here in SA with the drift schools that we run. If you have a stock car in completely stock form, you should pass scrutineering without any issues. It's normally when people start fiddling with cars that the issues with scrutineering come up. So it's all the basic stuff, like you can't have a cracked windscreen because it's against the insurance. You have to have a seat belt. You can have the normal seat belt, that's fine, but it needs to be in decent condition and it needs to be properly bolted in. Harnesses are one that seem to trip people up a bit with how they mount them and the angle that they mount them in. You don't have your harness go across your chest, through the seat holes and then straight down to the floor. They need to go at a decent angle. Somewhere between that and about that is usually okay. Look up at your local regs, that'll give you more idea how to mount those properly. But going straight to the floor, that's not really on, and there's a lot of reasons behind why that isn't. Other things, battery mounting seems to be a big one. Zip ties are out. Your ratchet straps, you might get away with it, but probably best that you mount it in a factory-ish kind of way, or at least bolt it to the floor with some plates on the underside. Otherwise, they'll usually do a check over of the car, make sure that there's nothing loose, everything is bolted in properly, like the seats and the wheels and all that sort of stuff. But it's all not too rigorous, it's not too difficult, and if you're happy to take a car out on track, if you're okayed it in your head to be safe enough to drive, then it's probably going to pass scrutineering. But just do some basic checks to make sure that your car can actually get out there on the day. So now you're out on track, you've passed scrutineering and you're ready to go. Let's go through a list of mods that you could do to your car to make it drive out on track a bit easier and make your day just that bit better. So number one on my list of modification recommendations is going to be do something about the diff on the car. Don't trust because it's got a factory LSD that it's going to be any good whatsoever, because generally we find that they're pretty much junk and the student struggles all day with a diff that's single spinning. So what we generally do is tell people if you're going to be doing a single cone donut or if you're going to be doing the figure eights, all you actually need to do is weld the diff or lock the diff somehow, because the rest of the stuff you can get away with, but that one single item you simply can't. So there's a couple of ways of dealing with the diff. First thing you can do is you can put a 1.5 way or a 2 way in the car. That's pretty expensive though, and I'm cheap and poor, so I've never done that. What I generally do is get the diff and shim it to the point that it's pretty much locked. I've done that in the 180, I've done it in the E46, and I've had pretty good luck. And that's the way that I would probably go about it, particularly if it's a street car. That way you don't have to shim it quite that tight and it won't be skipping in car parks and that sort of thing. If you want to go a different way, you can also weld the diff, where you basically get a whole bunch of random screws and metal bits, put it in the diff center and then go nuts with the welder. That's going to hold up, that's going to spin 2 wheels. You can also buy a spool, which is pretty much the same thing but a bit more legitimate way of doing it. That's the ways that you can go about locking that diff up, making sure that when you're out on track you're not single spinning. So number 2 on my list of modifications for beginners is going to be get yourself a decent set of coilovers. Don't think that those choppies or stock springs are going to do very good for you once you get into second gear and you start ripping around doing entries and transitions. When it comes to coilovers, you probably want to aim for the middle of the road, something like a mid to low spec BC. If you go too expensive, that money's better spent in other places like seat time. But eBay coilovers aren't going to be correctly sprung or valved, and it's going to make your life not that great. So something like these here, this is a BC sort of lower spec coilover on the missile car, and that's 32-way adjustable, it's height adjustable. This one doesn't have a camber top, but a lot of them will, so you can adjust the camber at the front end, and that's sort of what you want out of a coilover. Later down the track, you might get something that's double adjustable, but for the minute, for a beginner, I think this is perfect. So number 2 mod, get yourself a decent set of coilovers. So number 3 on my list is going to be do something about the seating position in the car. We see so many guys come out, they've got a stock leather seat, they've got just the normal seat belt, and they're sliding all over the inside of the car trying to do second gear entries and transitions, putting so much effort and force into holding themselves into the car and not nearly as much as they should into driving the car. So I would recommend at the very least a harness or a bucket seat. Ideally, both would be the way to go, but obviously there might be money or constraints being a street car or that sort of thing. So yeah, I would at least do one of those 2. That'll hold you in the seat. You won't have to be tensing your arms as you go around the corner and pushing your knees out against the interior trim to hold yourself in. And by doing that, you're going to focus without even noticing a lot more on the driving, and naturally that's going to mean you're going to drive better. So at this point in time, you've got the 3 things that you really need for a basic setup drift car. You've got a decent diff, you've got coilovers, and you've got a decent seat. Now all you need is a whole bunch of track time, whether it's so you can learn decent entries or you can learn to start tandeming. You're going to want as much time with your ass in that seat as possible. And to do that, you're going to need a reliable car. So number 4 on my list is going to be reliability mods. It's going to be specific to the individual person and setup too. So if your car's overheating, you're probably going to need to upgrade the radiator. If you keep blowing old coolant hoses on the engine, probably time to replace them with some new hoses. Axles and diffs, it might be time to upgrade those if you keep breaking them. Pretty much anything that doesn't allow you to spend as much time out on track as possible, now is the time to start upgrading those. All you need at this time, you don't need more power generally. You're probably not going to need more lock. You're going to need track time, and that's why it's number 4 on my list. Well, the final item on this list, number 5, is going to be get some adjustable arms for the car, particularly on the rear. When you lower the car to a driftable height, quite often that creates a decent amount of camber on the rear wheels, which means you chew out the inside of the tyres and go through tyres more quickly than you need to. If you get camber arms, you can adjust that back out to 0 and get even tyre wear, maximise that tyre life. On the front, I like a decent amount of caster. Just the way I drive. I don't know if it's because I've got one hand, but I do like the self-steering nature of having high amounts of caster. I find it driving a lot easier and a lot more natural that way. It depends on the car that you've got to how easy it is to put more caster in the front. I know on the S chassis and R chassis, this arm is pretty much enough to adjust the caster at the front. On the BMWs, you've got the lollipop that mounts off the chassis that you can use to put more caster in. And 350Zs, I think they're a bit more of a pain to do. So depends a bit on your chassis, but I would consider putting more caster in and just having a play around, adjust more and less in, and just see how you like it and what your preference is as a driver. Well, that's my list of the 5 things that I reckon beginners should focus on with their drift cars. Obviously, there was no engine or lock modifications listed then. I don't think that beginners should have to worry about that side of things too much when they start out. Generally, we find, or at least I find, that high horsepower or high lock just hides other issues with driving. And people that start out with those never actually get those basic parts down. Things like driving a car past full lock and clutch kicking, relying on using momentum to get the back end of the car out. Those are the sort of things that you learn at the start and you learn in a fairly basic car. So I didn't list anything in regards to horsepower or lock for that very reason. I think you'd probably want to be at least 6 to 8 events deep before you started thinking about those sort of things. Most cars that people drift, like 325i BMWs, S chassis, R chassis, they're going to have enough power to go sideways. You just got to put the right amount of tyre on the back and the right pressures to make sure that it's not too difficult to keep it sideways. So that's why I didn't list those. I do have a couple of other items that I might run you guys through to make your drift events a little bit easier with car setup. So let's jump down to the bench and I'll run you through them. Well, there's a couple of last hints that I thought I might give you guys just to round out this video. The first one being, don't feel that you need to have the car super gripped up when you start learning. You're probably better off to have it a bit more on the loose side. Reason being, you won't have to fight the car as much. It's going to feel more natural. It's going to be easier to get the car out sideways and keep it there. And generally, we'll find that students that have a gripped up car seem to struggle a bit more. Next thing is, if you do track days regularly, on like grip days on racetracks, make sure you think about the front tyres that you have on the car when you come out. We see people that normally go out to the Bend or Malala and they'll keep their super sticky front tyres that are usually pretty wide up front and then just chuck cheapies on the back. That creates a really weird balance in the car when you've got so much grip up front and then none out the back. And it also seems to create like a shuddering effect through the steering. So if you're going to do normal track days like that, probably have a different set of fronts or change those front tyres over to a normal street radial, just so the car's a bit more balanced and it doesn't do those weird bits and pieces. Next thing is traction control. We see that in a lot of cars these days, 350Zs and all sorts of other newer cars. Make sure you put some time and effort into turning off the traction control before you come out to the track. And also do a bit of research into what might make those electronics freak out. I have had people come out before in rather expensive cars that the engine management system doesn't like it hitting rev limiter and it seems to freak out the ECU and chuck it into a limp mode, which isn't a lot of fun for anyone, particularly on the wet pan where it's so easy to hit rev limiter. So put a bit of time and effort into that so you don't have to be messing around with it and wasting your track time. Next thing, passenger seats. That's a big one for us as instructors. We want to jump in the car with you, see your inputs as a driver and feel the car ourselves. But we're going to struggle to do that if you don't have a seat for us. So put in even just a normal standard seat and normal standard seat belt is going to be enough for us to jump in the car with you and see what you're doing. And that just gives us a lot better ability to help you guys out as instructors. Last thing on this list, and it's going to seem like a super basic one, but we have seen it before, is you need to have the right clothes when you come out to the track. Helmet's pretty obvious, but you need to have long sleeve t-shirt or a jumper, full length pants and closed toe shoes. We see people come out in shorts and a t-shirt and they have to run over to the Bend and buy merch so that they can get out on track, which isn't really ideal and wastes a bit of time. So make sure you do think about that side of things. Otherwise though, that's pretty much my video for you guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. More than that, I even hope that it helps you guys. Let me know in the comments if it has, or if you've got your own tips that you think are important for beginners, chuck them in the comments too. As always, like, subscribe, share, that normal YouTube algorithm bullshit, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Cheers.